guys, welcome to PDHPE with Miss Power. Today we are joined with Brett Connellan, who is a surfer and was attacked by a shark a few years ago, and he is here to share his story with us. So welcome to the show, Brett. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here and be able to hopefully impart some knowledge on the younger generations. It's always the goal.
Yeah. So can you tell us a bit about your surfing journey as a teenager?
Yeah. So my surfing journey's probably pretty, I suppose, textbook when it comes to what you'd expect. I didn't start surfing until I was 11 years old, which is probably pretty late compared to a lot of people these days. But you know, from the first time I actually stepped on a surfboard, it was like that's all I cared about. Like I absolutely love doing it. And, you know, for anyone who does surf, you do get that feeling where, you know, surfing is amazing. Like it takes you into nature, it gives you something to work on and improve. And for me, that was really how it all started. And it kind of evolved from there to, you know, competitive surfing, which was a pretty natural step. I always look back on my sort of younger competitive surfing career and always wish I knew as much about competing now, because I used to always overcomplicate things a lot. And I struggled a little bit with confidence early on, but that's something that kind of developed as I went on. So my, I suppose, success in surfing didn't really come until a little bit later. I'd had a couple of okay results when I was younger, but most of it, you know, sort of came when I was 18 years old and kind of beyond that. And that for me was kind of a combination of a few things. I really started to work out, you know, how I wanted to surf and the type of surfing that I wanted to do. I started to work out competitions a little bit more. And I really made it a passion of mine to chase competitive surfing, where it was more than just a lifestyle. It was something that I was actually doing with the purpose of making it a career or a lifestyle, and something I wanted to do, you know, very long term. So, you know, as far as my actual journey goes, it's something that when I reflect on, I've had, you know, some success when it comes to competitions, but for me, actually, some of my favorite moments have been through team competitions. And that's something that I think a lot of people find surprising, but it's something that runs so different to what surfing is normally. Surfing is a very individual sport, obviously. And I always enjoyed the idea of being in a team and kind of having, you know, a couple of people to support you and having other people to support through an event. And I think that for me, when I reflect, is as some of my favorite moments. And, you know, probably in particular, being able to surf in the Australian Board Riders Battle Final in 2015 is the first real, I suppose, stage where my local board riders had been at the top of, which was, you know, something that was massive for our community and massive for me as a surfer, being able to get that good result. And it kind of formed, you know, a little bit more purpose and a little bit more drive in me wanting to be able to chase the dream of becoming a professional surfer. So that's kind of where I was at the time of the shark attack. I decided that I was going to dedicate the next 12 months to the World Qualifying Series. And it was actually just in the lead up to the first event that the attack happened.
Yeah, right. That's so crazy. And as an athlete growing up, who inspired you?
I always looked to the local guys. You know, growing up on the South Coast, there's always been, you know, this sort of underdog mentality. I'd always looked at other surfers who were, you know, a similar level to mine, who might have lived in Sydney or on the Gold Coast, and they seemed to get a bit more exposure. They have the sponsors and stuff like that. And I always really appreciated the guys from down south here, guys like Reese Bombassi, or, you know, even like Owen and Mikey Wright from Culburra, those people who had been able to push past that, you know, lazy South Coaster sort of, I suppose, premonition to be able to put themselves out there and let their surfing really do the talking. So I look to guys like that a lot. And, you know, just everyday people. Like one of my favorite things to do when I was younger was look at some of the names on like the Board Riders Trophy. So it's just local guys from around here. But yeah, when you look at those names, it's pretty incredible to see the talent that we have, you know, in this area.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so in 2013, that was when the shark attack was?
2016.
2016, sorry.
Yeah.
Cool. And so can you tell us about this day? What was your movements? Where were you surfing?
It's an interesting day. So I think a lot of people expect me to say it was just a day like any other, but it kind of wasn't. I was working at a surf shop at the time up in Thirroul, and my day actually started at like 2:30 a.m. with a phone call from my boss saying the shop had been broken into. So that's how that day really started for me. And I spent a majority of the day just dealing with the break-in. So talking to police, cleaning up glass, doing all that side of things. And the reason for going for a surf in the afternoon was to, chill out and kind of decompress from what had been a pretty stressful time. Like surfing for me, yeah, it's always been something I've enjoyed doing. It's been something I've done competitively, but at the base of that, it's just because it really takes my mind off a lot of other things I was dealing with. It was something that helped a lot through school, helped in, any times where I was maybe going through a bit of a rough patch or feeling a little bit down. Surfing was always something that I could do to, help prop me back up. So that's the purpose for surfing that afternoon. I decided to just go for a surf at Bombo Beach down here in Kiama. And that's where I suppose I'd say it was an afternoon like any other. I'd called my good friend Joel, who I surf with a lot, told him I was going for a surf out Bombo. And yeah, just that afternoon, the waves were pretty fun. Was enjoying, a nice left-hander just in the middle of the beach. I typically tend to try and surf away from a lot of people. So I was surfing by myself until Joel came out, probably about 200 meters further down the beach. And yeah, we'd been, I'd been surfing by myself for about 40 minutes before Joel actually came out there. Joel's one of those good friends, and I'm sure everyone has one of these, who shows up late to everything. So, I mean, I'm lucky that he actually came at all, but he was late, and I do hold him to that, but definitely lucky he was there. Because he was, without him being there that afternoon, I don't think I would have made it to the beach, let alone be able to survive and be able to tell my story here today.
Yeah.
So, at the time of the attack, like at that very moment, it was kind of a bit of a surreal experience, because Joel and I had been surfing for like 25 minutes and both sharing waves. I was telling him about the break-in in the day that I just had. And Joel had caught a wave and he was sort of a little bit further down the line. And I was just sitting out the back by myself, and I was kind of reflecting on that day that I'd had, like thinking about the break-in, thinking about what I've been through, and saying to myself, well, at least I've been able to come for a surf and enjoy this. At least I've been able to talk to a good friend. Like, I'm feeling a lot better than I was a couple of hours ago. And it was as I was having that thought that I got hit from my right side by what felt like a car or a bus. I'd been thrown off my board, and before I could actually figure out what had happened, I looked down and there's a shark biting my left leg, which for me was another, I suppose, surreal moment. It was one of those moments, and I'm sure, anytime you talk to someone who's been through a very significant moment like this, it's that moment where time slows down to the point of stopping. And for me, that moment is something that felt like it lasted about 5 minutes. In reality, it was probably only about 5 seconds. But in that time, I could take in all of the really fine details of what was going on. Like, the feel of the shark's skin, the look in its eyes, all those really small details that I think I'm lucky to have. Like, it's obviously a pretty terrifying image to recreate, but I think without that, it makes it a lot harder to talk about the experience. And I'm glad that I do have those vivid memories, because it allows me to actually step through things and talk about it, which has been a really big part of, what I do now. I'm sure, whenever I sort of get to this point and talking about the shark attack, a lot of people are like, well, come on, did you punch it? And, I tried. That's probably the first thought that comes to anyone's mind. The only thing about punching is it's really hard to do through water. So that didn't work. The only thing I could really do was to try and pull away from the shark. And that worked, but also didn't work. And the way to explain it is that, as humans, we're pretty fragile. As the shark was holding onto my leg, it didn't just let go when I started pulling away. It held onto that bit of leg and actually separated a large part of my quad. Which is how I lost a large, chunk of my thigh. But that allowed me to focus on trying to swim towards the beach and, escape that situation. The shark did come back a second time. And I was lucky enough that I had that thought of, if it's going to come back, and saw it just in time to put my hands out and try and stop it and hold it at arm's length until a wave eventually hit us and kind of separated us underwater. At that moment, I was able to actually stand up, so I didn't have to swim anymore. But the next time I looked up was probably the luckiest thing I could see. It wasn't the shark coming back a third time. It was actually Joel paddling towards me as fast as he could, which is something that, I can't thank him enough, obviously, for being there, first of all, but to paddle towards that danger and, show that bravery is something that I'll forever be grateful for, because I don't think you know what you're going to do in those situations until you get put in them. And for him to make that decision and that choice to paddle towards me is something that, I would hope I would do for someone else, but you just don't know. And I'm lucky that he made that choice, because I'd lost my board in that initial impact, and he had to put me on his board and take me to the beach, where him and his partner, Aggie, who's an intensive care nurse, and another nurse that was walking along the beach, applied tourniquets to my leg using leg ropes and wetsuits, and called for help, which eventually came in the form of ambulance and then helicopter, which took me, from the beach. So that's kind of, I suppose, the experience in a nutshell.
Yeah. Do you remember like the helicopter in that, or were you in shock by then and passing out, or?
So I can remember, I was conscious and I could remember everything up until I got in the helicopter. So there are a few things that kind of helped me stay conscious. Like, I always say that one of the biggest things that helped me, stay calm and conscious was actually a lesson I learned from Bethany Hamilton, which some people may be familiar with her story. She was bitten by a shark in Hawaii, and she lost one of her arms. But I can remember watching her documentary, or watching something about her story, and I remember her saying that she didn't look down at her arm because she didn't want to go into shock. And that was one of the first things that entered my mind. So I didn't look at my leg at all throughout that experience.
Wow. And
I was just focusing on trying to stay present, trying to stay calm, focusing on my breathing. And that was a big thing that helped me. And it's definitely something, when I talk to other people that were there, they really remark it, how calm I was in that situation, because the other people that were surfing eventually came into the beach to see what was going on. And as I'm laying on sand, I'm seeing all these familiar faces come up, and me trying to be calm I was just talking to them like normal. I'd be like, "Hey, George, how you going?" And seeing them like just their eyes like wide open. And for me, I was just trying to stay calm and
that's mind blowing. Like that's so crazy that you were able to keep your cool like that.
Yeah, it's that, like, I didn't really have any other options. Like, there was nothing I could do in that moment to, other than focus on my breath, trying to stay present and trying to take my mind off what was going on. Without doing that, I would have been definitely panicking. So it really was a lucky thought that I had to really focus on those things.
Yeah. Wow. And so then you were airlifted to which hospital?
St. George Hospital up in Sydney.
Yep. And what was the surgery that they did?
So I had a couple of surgeries. The first two surgeries were basically just to clean the sand out. The doctors said they'd never seen so much sand in a wound ever. So it took them two surgeries just to clean it up. What had ended up happening, I lost 3/4 of my left quad, which is quite a large proportion of a very significant muscle. And at the start, they were talking about potential for amputation. They were looking at a couple of different options of what they could do to try and save the leg. So that was kind of the first priority, was trying to save the leg, assessing if there'd been any further damage. And what they ended up doing, which was the third operation, was something I think that had only been done once before. But they took my left lat muscle from my back and implanted that in my leg to kind of cover the bone that was exposed. They connect a blood supply and a nerve through that to keep it alive. And they say the nerve might eventually give that muscle function. But for me, that operation, with that as well, they skin grafted together. So they took skin from like my calf, my hip, and my hamstring, like back there, to bind it all together. And it was kind of just a waiting game from there. It was more just about keeping the leg, and the prognosis from doctors and over the coming weeks was something that I really struggled with early on. They kind of gave me three things to expect when it came to the long-term prognosis. Number one, they were talking about the possibility of walking, and they said because of the damage to the leg, it's going to be very hard for you to walk normally again. You'll be in a wheelchair for a long time, crutches for a significant period after that. They said kind of best case scenario would be I would have a device that would sit on my knee, which would kind of perform the function of the quad, which would straighten my leg out. So I'd be able to walk forwards.
Right.
They said because of that, living an active lifestyle, so playing sports, it'd be very difficult. Obviously, if you're struggling to walk, you can't really run. And that was hard for me to hear as well, because apart from surfing, I enjoyed doing a lot of other sports as well. And then the third thing, obviously, that kind of goes on the back of not being active is they said you'll never surf again. And that for me was the real, I suppose, dagger. Like that was the one that hurt the most. And the reason it hurt the most is because it was the only thing that they said for sure. Like they said you might not walk properly again. Like being active will be a struggle, but they said you will never surf again, just due to the complexity of getting your body fit and proper for surfing. And understandable for them to say that, but that for me put me in a difficult spot where I was kind of struggling a lot, not only with the attack and trying to come to terms with that, but being told I could never surf again was enormous. Like that for me was more than just being told that I could never play a sport again. That was me losing like my identity. Yeah. Like for me, from the age of 11, when I first stepped on a surfboard, I made that my entire life. Like I put all my focus into, learning how to surf and doing it properly. Like all my friends were in surfing, doing it competitively. My first job was a surf instructor. I'd worked in a surf shop. Even when I finished school, I went and did surfing studies at university. Like everything I did was in this one basket of surfing, and, being told that you can never do that again, it really caused me to struggle. Like the weeks after that were definitely the toughest for me to get through. And, a big part of that is from what I'd been told, but also how alone I felt. Not only feeling alone in what I was going through, but the times I struggled most were probably night times in hospital. Like hospital's not a great place to spend time in the first place. Like the food's terrible, it's cold, and it's really, really lonely, especially at nighttime. And all of you.
And how old were you? Sorry.
So I was 23 at the time. I was 22 at the time of the attack, and I had that big operation on my 23rd birthday.
Wow.
So yeah, I was 23, and I'd never really been through anything significant like that before. Like I'd been injured and had to spend, a couple of weeks or months away from surfing, but nothing to that extent. Like I'd had other things happen, which were, those times where you can feel a bit down, but nothing like this before. And because I hadn't been there at any stage of my life, I didn't really know how to work through it. Like that was the biggest barrier for me, was everything up until that point I'd been able to work through myself. I'd been able to kind of go for a surf, or I've been able to do things myself to work through that tough time until I was able to, level it out. But this was different because the things I'd usually do were now taken away from me. And I was very, very, very fortunate that I had a lot of great support, not only just in my friends and family, but the local community down here and surfing community worldwide were things that, really supported me through that tough time. And when I started to feel that support, when I started to feel like I wasn't alone, that was one of the big things that helped me get through that tough period, to the point where I was able to eventually start with my rehab and my physio and start to work on the physical recovery, which was kind of the next challenge.
Yeah. And so what was your recovery? How many times were you with physio? What did that look like for you?
So it was a bit of a staged approach. At the start, it was just going to physio to figure out what we could do. And at the start, it was more just letting the wound heal. So I remember the first time I actually went to physio and met Scott, who was my physiotherapist. And he was telling me, we've got to wait for this to heal. They're, going to keep your legs straight for a couple of months. But he said, you've been laying in a hospital bed for a couple of months now. You've got a perfectly good upper body. Let's start working on that. And that was, the introduction to physio that I had. From the moment that I actually started working at physio, not even specifically on my leg, and combined with this new purpose that I had around looking at the support that I got and being very, very grateful for that, I decided that I wanted to put everything that I had into this recovery to not only, prove what was possible to myself and also doctors, but also as a bit of a thank you, I suppose, to everyone who had helped me get through those really tough times early on. Yeah. I kind of started to make my recovery more about doing it for them rather than for myself, even though it was a very personal pursuit. It was something that I wanted to do to say thank you for everyone. So I was in the physio. I think ideally it would have been, 2 days a week, but I was going 5-6 days a week, like every single day, pretty much I was in there. Just trying to, not necessarily trying to take these huge leaps, but just trying to be a little bit better each day. It wasn't this massive thing where I felt the pressure to be better and better, but I learned this very early on that you can't make these huge leaps every single day. But if you go in there with the mentality of I'm going to do everything to just focus on improving and taking a step forward, then that was the best way I could visualize what was going to be a pretty long recovery, because it was, the best part of, a couple of years before I got back to being, what you'd consider recovered. But, there was different stages along that. It went from just the recovery and working on bending my knee when it eventually healed, to the point where I could, get out of a brace and start learning how to walk again. Which was a process in itself. And it took me a couple of months just to be able to walk and be on my feet for, an entire day.
Yeah.
It went from there to, learning how to run again. And there was always kind of this goal of being able to get back in the water and surf, because that was the big thing that the doctors had told me that I wouldn't be able to do. So we kind of just worked at those, week by week. And it eventually took me 5 months to get back in the water and surf again. Definitely not at the same level I was before, but just to get back in the water and kind of say, I've done this. I've done something that I've been told I'll never do again. And that process, it was long and it was difficult. I'm very proud to say I was able to achieve that.
Absolutely.
But it's nothing. I could not have done that if it wasn't for the support that I had, not only in the physio, but people outside of that. And I always say, if I didn't, look at taking care of my mental health, which is something that I was struggling with early on, it would have been a lot harder for me to recover physically. So that's a big thing that I try and tell a lot of people today, is that they're kind of two separate things that we have to manage in a similar way.
With your mental health, did you have to, or did you want to go see a counselor or psychologist to talk through the event?
Yeah, so that was a big step. Like I said, I thought I was kind of trying to do this a lot on my own. And there was one conversation that really changed my perception to a lot of that. It was one that I had with my dad, who he kind of just pointed out the way in which my experience was not just impacting me personally, but it was impacting other people as well, like my family. He kind of pointed out how it was impacting, my mum and what she was dealing with, talking to doctors, doing research, stuff like that. My sisters, because they were both living away at the time and were trying to get back and see me and be with the family, and going through, consistent phone calls with the media and all of that stuff that they didn't want to deal with. And then my dad as well, pointing out how it affected him, as someone who's worked in emergency services before and seen a lot of critical incidents, and, getting down to the beach and being in a position where he can't provide that help. He had to be a bystander, and how that impacted him. So when he outlined things like that, I started to see how my experience, it wasn't just me going through it. I had other people alongside me, which was a really important thing to note. And on the back of that, he recommended that we go and see a counselor, as a family, to start talking. And that was a big thing in getting me to realize that talking was great, not only just to, talk about what had happened in the attack and how I felt, but to make me feel a lot closer to a lot of people, because that's something we don't often recognize, is that, the struggles that we go through, it's a tough thing when we're going through them, because we feel so alone, but it's something that we'll all go through at some point in life. Like, we all have our down days, or we'll have events happen in life that we will struggle with. And a big part of it is knowing that we're not alone, and working on those ways in which we can get through that tough time. And sometimes we can't work through them without experience. But a big thing I tell a lot of people is that if you're stuck, you definitely don't have to do that alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so you got back in the water. What was it like being back? I know, it would just be crazy to have a shark. What was your thought process with that?
It's funny, I get asked that question a lot. And I think for me, getting back in the water, it came a lot quicker than what I thought it was going to. I had pictured surfing being a couple of years down the road. And because I thought I had to be essentially in the same condition that I was before to be able to get back in the water. I never really even considered that I would get back in the water on a longboard first and then kind of work up from there. So it was really just a random day that I went into physio, and Scott was like, try and stand up as if you're on a board. And I kind of did it. And he was like, I think, it's time you reward yourself and get back in the water. So I didn't really have much time to think about what it would feel like. I was just, I think I was excited, but my best friend, Nick, who I'd surf with every single day, who'd lost his surfing partner for 5 months, he was even more excited. So he was like, I'll come get you. I'll get you a longboard. We'll go for a surf. So I didn't really have too much time to think about it, which I think was probably a good thing.
Yeah.
But at the base of that, it's, going in the water, sharks in general, like as a surfer, the risks of going in the ocean. You have to accept that every time you do, like as someone who drives a car, as you accept those risks every time you get behind the wheel. It's no different, when you go in the water. So I think that's something I've always been very conscious of. And, whether it's before the attack or after, it really is no different. Like I think I'm a pretty rational person and you can look at the numbers of being, the odds of being attacked by a shark. And when you actually, break it down like that, it's not something that you should be afraid of. But there are definitely reasons to be afraid of it. Like that, then there obviously are, because there are a lot of people who are afraid of sharks, and it's understandable.
Yeah. And so post-attack, apart from your recovery, what has been the biggest change in your life?
Biggest change for me has been realizing how much more there is to life outside of surfing, which is a strange thing to kind of come to, because I know when I tell my story, it's all about getting back to surfing, like getting back to this person I was before. And I kind of always describe it as this sort of version of climbing a mountain. So my entire life I was climbing this mountain of becoming a professional surfer. And when I got bitten by a shark, I fell all the way to the bottom of that mountain. As I was going through my recovery, getting back to, the person I am today, I thought I was climbing that same mountain. But in reality, I was climbing a different one, which had a lot more to it. Like it was taller, it had, more, it was more scenic. It's probably a flawed analogy. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that when I was able to take a step back and really have a look at what I was doing before compared to what I was doing now, I started to realize a few things that I'd started to really prioritize in life. Like before it was all about surfing, whereas now I had, these other things that I cared about. Like I cared a lot more about my relationships now and those people in my life that I mentioned before that would, really help me get through that tough time. I wasn't all about surfing. Like through my recovery, I also picked up golf. So that was something I didn't do before, but it just kind of added to who I was as a person. I think one of the biggest things it did for me was it caused me to kind of be a little bit less selfish in a way. And this is kind of a strange way of explaining it, but surfing itself as a sport is a pretty selfish thing to do. For me anyway, when I used to go out in the water, it was all about me and my surfing and getting the best wave out there. And especially when it comes to competition, it's a very individual sport.
Yeah.
But when I was able to take a step back and, just be grateful for going in the water rather than it being a competition every time I entered the water, I was able to enjoy the sport a lot more and focus on, more of what was going on out there and enjoy a lot more things, not only in the water, but just in life in general. I think anyone who spends, or any surfer who spends like a lengthy period of time out of the water, you can start to appreciate some other things in life. Like I would, the other way I explain this is, before the attack, I would never have gone on a holiday somewhere where I couldn't surf. Like that limits you so much in your worldview. Because,
where you can go.
Yeah, exactly. And the first place I went after the attack was to the south of France where my sister was living for her wedding. And I remember being there and we were in the mountains and I was like, this is incredible. And if it wasn't for the attack and having that, perspective, I never would have realized this. So, there's a lot of different changes to my life and all of them have been positive.
Yeah, that's great. And do you have like a mantra or a quote that you refer to during like your tough times or that you live your life by?
There's probably a few. For me, like these days, my purpose is kind of fueled by using my experience to help others. So for me personally, it's more about what can I do to, have an impact on someone else's life, whether it be through doing, a talk like this, whether it be through the keynotes that I do, whether it be through, a movie or a documentary, or sharing a story, or even like an Instagram post. That everything I kind of do, it has that purpose of this could help someone. And I think everybody has the ability to do that. You can look anywhere and find inspiration, and it doesn't have to be someone who's been through something like a shark attack. You can find inspiration in so many different ways. And I think that's a big thing that I try and do, is just have a purpose to why I'm doing something. Like if I'm struggling, it's like, okay, well, let's take a step back and remember why we're doing this. So it's not necessarily a mantra. It's more just a way that I look at my life. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. And so what does your day-to-day life look like now? What are you doing?
So largely, well, it kind of summed it up before, using my story to help others.
Yeah.
I do this through, keynote talks or speaking at schools. I also do it through, I'm at the moment working on a documentary. I'm telling my story in full, not just from my perspective, but from everyone's perspective, because, there's only so much of my story that's mine to tell. And a big part of that is kind of the idea that you don't have to be defined by what happens to you. It's really about what you do afterwards. That's what will help us, get through whatever it is that we're going through, but it's also how we'll be remembered. And that's probably the main thing. So working on not only my own documentary, but that's something I want to pursue a little bit more in the future, is working on other people's documentaries and helping them share their own stories. Because as someone who has, who now knows the power that sharing your own story can hold in being able to help other people, I want to help other people be able to do that as well, because it's an incredible feeling knowing you can have an impact on someone else's life. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. Even for yourself as a school teacher, you have the ability to impact a student's life in a way that, you might not have had if you weren't a school teacher. Like, I think we all get these opportunities to be able to impact other people's lives in a positive way. And it's something that I'm really, really passionate about.
No, that's great. And what's the film called?
The film's called Pyrophytic,
which
which is a tricky title. The pyrophytic, it actually relates to plants. Pyrophytes are a species of plant we have in Australia, and they are all over the world, but they require fire in order to germinate and regrow. So it's a bit of a metaphor for my story, the shark attack being the fire, which I kind of needed for me to grow and become better.
Yeah.
So,
and where can we watch it? Where is it being released?
It'll be done this time next year.
Yeah.
So a big part of the film will be me paddling the Molokai, which is a 52-kilometer open ocean paddle in Hawaii, which I'll be doing in the middle of next year. So after that's all finished, we'll be able to put everything together and release it. As for where you can find it, I'm not sure yet, but we will.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. It depends. So we've got a bit of time to figure out what the best way to do that is, whether it be on like a streaming platform or in theaters. We'll work it out when it gets a bit closer.
Yeah, that's really cool. And there's an Instagram page to follow the film's journey, isn't there?
Yes, there is, just called Pyrophytic Film, or you can always follow me, and I've got regular updates on there.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. And are you still jumping in the water to compete with surfing?
I am occasionally. It's funny you bring that up, because I haven't competed this year, but I've got 2 comps in like the next month, which are both, one of them is just a board riders one, and the other one is a teams comp, which I said I really enjoy. So I'm still surfing as much as I can, like still getting in the water a lot, because it's a big part of who I am. And competitive surfing for me, it took a bit of a different place in my life. Like I said, with the way that I look at a lot of things now, competitive surfing isn't as much priority for me, but I still do enjoy surfing, and a big part of that comes in competition. But I really try to prioritize the team comps above everything else.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so to finish off, we are going to do a thing called Hot 4, and there's 4 quick questions for you to answer. So the first one is your favorite food.
My favorite food is eggs on toast.
Love it, so good.
Yeah.
Favorite book.
The Alchemist.
Cool. An unusual habit or thing you love.
I'm doing it right now, picking my fingernails.
In the last 5 years, what is one thing or item that has improved your life?
One thing or item that's improved my life. That's a tough one. I think there's a lot of things I can try and look at. I don't know. My best one's probably the guy that's sitting right beside me here, my dog. He's one of my favorite things.
What's his name?
My life. His name's Kendrick. He's a little dash hound. Hang on, I'll grab him for a sec.
Yeah, please do.
This is him.
Bless, he's so cute.
Yeah. So he's great. He's great company.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your story with us. And we will stay tuned for the movie release next year. And yeah, thank you so much, Brett.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the story and can take something away from it.